Here's a truth that will unsettle you. The most dangerous man in the room is rarely the one who raises his voice. He is the one who doesn't need to. You have met people like this before. Maybe only once. A person who walked into a tense room, and the room adjusted itself around them. No threats. No posturing. Just presence. And here is the uncomfortable part: most of us are doing the opposite. We raise our voice to be heard. We over-explain to be respected. We flinch first, and then wonder why no one takes us seriously. This isn't a video about intimidation through aggression. Anyone can learn to yell. Anyone can learn to threaten. That is cheap, and it is fragile, because it depends on the other person being afraid enough not to test it. What we are talking about tonight is older, and colder, and far more permanent. The Stoics called it a kind of armor, not one you wear, but one you become. 2,000 years ago, there was a Roman senator who never needed to shout. Men who commanded armies were, by several historical accounts, unsettled simply standing near him. Julius Caesar himself is remembered as having feared him more than any general on any battlefield. Not because of what this man could do to Caesar. Because of what he could not be made to do. Stay with me. Because by the end of this, you will understand the difference between fear that fades, and presence that lasts. Think, for a moment, about the last time you truly felt small in front of another person. Chances are, it wasn't because they were bigger, or richer, or louder. It was because some part of you needed something from them, their approval, their good opinion, their permission to feel at ease. That need is the hinge every uncomfortable interaction swings on. Now think about someone who needed nothing from you at all. Not coldness. Not arrogance. Just completeness. That is the quality we are going to build tonight, piece by piece, using a method that has survived 2,000 years precisely because it works on the oldest part of the human mind. His name was Marcus Porcius Cato. History remembers him as Cato the Younger, to separate him from his famous great-grandfather. And according to the biographer Plutarch, who wrote of his life roughly a century and a half after his death, Cato was, from a young age, strange in a way that unsettled the people around him. Not strange in weakness. Strange in his refusal to bend. Plutarch records a story from Cato's childhood, during the Social War, when a Roman ally named Papadius Silo visited the household and jokingly asked the children to support his cause, promising sweets if they agreed. The other children laughed and agreed easily. Cato said nothing. He simply stared back, refusing. When Silo, still joking, held the boy out of a window and threatened to drop him unless he agreed, Cato still would not answer. He held his silence even suspended in the air. This is not embellishment for effect. This is a story that has survived, attributed to Plutarch's account, precisely because it was so unusual even by Roman standards. Cato was raised, according to Plutarch, in the household of his uncle Drusus, after being orphaned young. Rome at the time was a city thick with political violence and shifting alliances, and children of noble families were groomed almost from birth to read a room, to flatter the powerful, to bend when bending was useful. By most accounts, Cato showed almost none of this instinct. Tutors reportedly found him difficult precisely because he could not be talked out of a position once he had reasoned his way into it, even as a small child. Where other boys adjusted their answers depending on who was listening, Cato apparently gave the same answer regardless of the audience, regardless of the consequence. This is worth sitting with, because it is the seed of everything that follows. The steadiness that would later unsettle the most powerful man in Rome did not appear suddenly in the Senate. It was, by the accounts we have, present from childhood, in a boy who would rather hang out a window in silence than purchase safety with a single false word. By the time Cato reached the Senate, this same quality had calcified into something far more formidable. Historical accounts describe him wearing a dark, unadorned toga, deliberately without the customary purple stripe of his rank, and at times reportedly walking through the streets of Rome without shoes. Not out of poverty. Out of principle. He wanted to prove, publicly, that he could not be shamed by appearances, and therefore could not be controlled through them. People mocked him for it. And this is the part worth sitting with: the mockery did not work. Because mockery only functions on someone who is still negotiating, internally, for approval. Cato had already settled that argument with himself, long before anyone else raised it. Rome, in this era, ran almost entirely on appearances. A man's toga, his entourage, the width of the purple stripe on his robe, these were not decoration. They were currency, a visible ledger of status that every citizen was trained from birth to read and to respect. For Cato to walk through the forum stripped of these signals was not eccentricity. By the standards of the time, it was closer to a quiet act of defiance against the entire social machinery of the Republic. And the remarkable part, according to the sources describing this period, is that it did not diminish him. If anything, it seemed to concentrate something around him. Historical accounts note that even his political enemies, men who disagreed with nearly everything he stood for, rarely questioned his integrity, because there was nothing to catch him in. He had already given up the things that could be used as leverage against most men: comfort, luxury, the fear of embarrassment. During the great political struggles of his era, the rise of Pompey, and later of Julius Caesar, Cato became the most consistent obstacle Rome's most powerful men faced. Not because he commanded legions. He rarely did. His resistance was almost entirely rhetorical and moral. He would stand on the Senate floor for hours, famously filibustering to block votes he considered corrupt, historical accounts say, at times speaking until nightfall so that no decision could be forced through before dark. He was, at points, physically dragged from the rostra. Historical sources describe him being manhandled by supporters of his rivals during heated sessions. And by most accounts, he did not fight back, and he did not break composure. He simply waited, was released, and returned to make the same argument again. Consider what that moment must have felt like from the other side. You have just had a man physically hauled off the platform in front of the entire Senate, a public humiliation meant to end the argument once and for all. And within days, sometimes within hours, he is back in the same spot, delivering the same case, as though nothing at all had happened to him. There is no countermove for that. You cannot humiliate a man who has already decided that humiliation is simply not a category he participates in. This is the detail that historians consistently note about him, and it is worth pausing on. Caesar, a man who conquered Gaul and crossed the Rubicon without hesitation, is remembered by ancient sources as viewing Cato's incorruptible steadiness as one of his most serious political threats. Not Cato's armies. He had none of consequence. His unwillingness to be moved. To be clear, we cannot know Caesar's private thoughts with certainty, and no verified direct quotation survives of him naming this fear outright. But the historical record, from multiple ancient sources describing the political climate of the time, consistently paints a portrait of a man whose greatest weapon was simply his refusal to be reached. That refusal is the entire lesson. Here is what almost nobody tells you about presence, about gravity, about the qualities some call intimidating without understanding what it actually is. It is not about being unreadable through mystery. It is about being unreachable through indifference to the wrong things. Modern psychology has a name for a piece of this. It's related to what researchers call an internal locus of control, the sense that your worth and your decisions are generated from within you, not handed to you by the reactions of others. Cato's steadiness was, in essence, an extreme, almost architectural version of that same principle, centuries before the term existed. Every time you need someone's approval to feel secure, you have handed them a lever. Pull the lever, and you react. You over-explain. You raise your voice. You shrink. Cato removed the levers. There was nothing to pull. Mock his clothing, he had already decided clothing meant nothing. Threaten him physically, he had already decided the body could be taken, but the argument would still be spoken. This is, almost word for word, the foundation Epictetus later taught in his discourses, the idea, paraphrased, that we suffer not from events themselves, but from the judgments we attach to them, and that some things lie within our control while others do not. The people who unsettled Caesar were not the ones who threatened him. Caesar met threats with legions, and won. The people who unsettled him were the ones who had nothing left for him to threaten. This is the psychological core of what we call dangerous presence. It is not aggression. Aggression is loud because it is insecure, and insecurity, biologically, tries to make itself bigger to compensate. True stillness does not compensate. It has nothing to prove, because it has already settled, internally, what matters and what does not. And here's where this becomes directly useful to you, in your career, in your relationships, in your own quiet battles. Every negotiation, every confrontation, every moment someone tries to provoke a reaction out of you, is really just an attempt to find your lever. The moment you no longer need their approval, their money, their opinion, or their comfort to feel whole, the lever disappears. And what replaces it, to the people watching, often reads as something between calm and dangerous. Not because you threaten anyone. Because you simply could not be moved. There is a reason this reads, to the nervous system of an onlooker, as more unsettling than shouting. Human beings are extraordinarily good at reading microsignals of anxiety, a slight raise in pitch, a quickened blink, a defensive posture. We evolved to detect these signals because, for most of our history, they told us who was safe to challenge and who was not. Someone who shows none of these signals under pressure is registering, on some preverbal level, as an unknown quantity. Not necessarily a threat. Simply someone the usual social tools do not seem to work on. This is also why so much modern advice about confidence misses the point entirely. It tells you to fake it, to stand taller, to speak with more volume, as though presence were a costume you put on for the room. Cato's example, and the Stoic tradition behind it, suggests almost the opposite. The steadiness has to be real, because a room full of people, consciously or not, can tell the difference between a performance and a settled conviction. You cannot posture your way into this. You have to actually resolve, internally, what you are willing to lose, and what you are not. So how do you actually build this? Not perform it, build it. Here are 4 practices, drawn directly from Stoic method, that you can start today. Step 1. The discipline of assent. Epictetus taught, in paraphrase, that our reactions are not automatic, they are choices we make so quickly we mistake them for instinct. Before you respond to an insult, a slight, a provocation, pause for one full breath. Ask yourself plainly, is this actually within my control? If someone's opinion of you is the trigger, recognize that their opinion was never yours to control in the first place. This single pause, practiced daily, is what separates a reaction from a response. Do this for 1 week, every time you feel the urge to defend yourself verbally, and simply notice how often the urge fades on its own within that breath. Keep a small written log if you can, just a few words each time. What provoked you? What you almost said? What you actually did instead? Within days, a pattern usually emerges. Most of what feels urgent in the moment turns out, on the page, to have been almost nothing at all. Step 2. Voluntary discomfort. Seneca, in his letters, described deliberately practicing poverty for short periods, eating plain food, wearing rough clothing, asking himself whether this was truly the thing he feared. This is not about suffering for its own sake. It is about proving to yourself, in small controlled doses, that discomfort will not destroy you. Once a week, choose something mildly uncomfortable, a cold shower, a missed meal, a long walk in poor weather, and sit inside that discomfort without escaping it. Each time you do this, you are quietly removing a lever that fear used to hold over you. Step 3. The view from above. Marcus Aurelius, in Meditations, repeatedly returned to the practice of imagining his life, his conflicts, his enemies, from a vast distance, as those seen from far above the earth, reduced to their true size against the scale of time. When someone attempts to provoke you, mentally zoom out. Picture the argument in 10 years. In 100. Ask what will remain of this moment. Almost nothing does. This practice does not numb you to life. It recalibrates what deserves your urgency, and what does not. Marcus wrote this practice into his private notebook, never intending it for an audience, during a reign filled with plague, war, and betrayal from men he trusted. If a Roman emperor found it necessary to shrink his conflicts down to size against the backdrop of the whole earth, it is worth asking whether the argument you are about to have tonight truly warrants the weight you are prepared to give it. Step 4. Silent composure under provocation. This is the practice Cato embodied without ever naming it. The next time you are criticized, mocked, or challenged in front of others, resist the urge to immediately defend yourself. Let a full 3 seconds of silence pass before you respond, if you respond at all. Watch what that silence does to the room. In most cases, the provocation was seeking a reaction, and the absence of one is more unsettling than any counterattack could be. Practice this specifically in low-stakes situations first, a rude comment from a stranger, a minor jab from a colleague, before applying it where the stakes are higher. None of these steps require you to become cold, or cruel, or closed off from people you love. They require you to stop outsourcing your composure to the behavior of others. Cato was eventually defeated, politically, by men with more armies and more gold than he ever had. He lost the war he spent his life fighting. And yet his name has outlasted every senator who mocked his bare feet, and very nearly outlasted the empire that dragged him from that rostra. That is the part worth remembering. The people who need to shout to be believed rarely are, for very long. The ones who never needed to raise their voice at all are the ones history keeps circling back to. You do not become dangerous by becoming louder. You become dangerous the day you no longer need the room's permission to remain exactly who you are. If this found you at the right moment, subscribe, and walk back into that room a little harder to move than you were yesterday.